We've been talking about women being in senior roles quite literally for decades. And I think we need to ask ourselves, why aren't we there yet?
Teams that incorporate diverse perspectives are consistently more innovative and better equipped to navigate uncertainty.
With the increased female representation in executive roles, we're going to see a multiplier effect on hiring and sponsorship.
Hello everyone, welcome to Insurance Business TV and welcome to an Elite Women special edition. Yes, every year Insurance Business celebrates some of the leading women in the industry, those that are in positions of leadership, mentoring the next generation, or simply inspiring those around them. And today we're joined by some of this year's Elite Women class from around the world to talk about some of the biggest issues facing women in the sector. I'm delighted to be joined by Abbie Taylor, Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Fortegra in the USA. Dionne Bowers, co-founder and past chair of the Canadian Association of Black Insurance Professionals, also National Business Development Account Executive at Markel, Canada, and Milia Xystros. She is head of TPA claims at Crawford and Company in Australia. So welcome everyone, and to get the ball rolling, just tell me about the structural or cultural shifts, whether they're positive or negative, that you have observed for women working in insurance, and indeed, which of these do you think will have the longest term impact? Milia, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Paul. I think there's been a number of structural and cultural shifts that have had long-term impact for women in senior leadership roles and indeed women in any role. In particular, changes to working models with more flexible working options and hybrid working models available. Certainly spurred forward by the global pandemic, by COVID. So something that's really happened to support women. Society, I think still women provide the primary caregiving, and hybrid work models certainly help to support that type of culture. There's certainly also been, over a number of years now, evolving perceptions in what it means to be a leader. The days where the leader was the boss, the assertive, almost aggressive male who made decisions on their own, gone. And leadership now is really seen to be something that is more focused on collaboration and diverse decision making to make the right decisions for a company. And I think they tend to lend themselves better with women. There are some risks, though, I think, coming from structural and cultural shifts, and they include, as an example, AI and tech. Traditionally more male-dominated areas, data-driven methodology and the like. So I think there's a real opportunity for us to consider what that impact will have long-term on women who are in management and senior management roles, and what we can do to support and educate them to future-proof them.
Yeah, a lot of great points there from Milia, Abbie, but particularly that one around AI. I mean, that's just reshaping things across the board, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think the most crucial shift is the redefinition of core insurance expertise going forward. As an operations and technology executive, I see areas like AI and data analytics reshaping the industry, and therefore the profile of future leaders will evolve as well. And the long-term impact for women will really hinge on whether they're able to gain early and meaningful exposure to technical and commercial roles that define enterprise leadership in the future. Another structural change I would just mention is I do think there's more visibility at the top to female leaders, and that'll influence the pipeline below. With the increased female representation in executive roles, we're going to see a multiplier effect on hiring and sponsorship. And I think female leaders can use their visibility to deliberately build the next layer of enterprise-ready talent that will shape the industry's long-term leadership composition.
Okay, so more female leaders at the top, more visible at least. Dionne, is that helping with career paths?
I would say that career pathing at this point, and what I've noticed is that it has flattened, which has created early roadblocks for women. So if we look at the broken rung theory, where the substantial barrier women encounter during their initial advancement from entry-level roles to managerial roles, it continues, it persists. So when we look at organizations that are creating pathways, I think it's really important that we emphasize a trajectory that helps women progress. So things like access to sponsorship is very key. We talk about mentorship as being one piece of the puzzle, but sponsorship being the point that is required for women to excel and transition into leadership roles. So making sure that they have access to high visibility assignments that allow women to demonstrate their capabilities, because that I find is diminishing. So when we have a strong male dominated appearance within the industry, it's now saying, well, as a sponsor, what can I give this individual to profile them as when they're not in the room? So as formal development support declines and promotion opportunities narrow, the long-term consequences is a weakened leadership pipeline that ultimately constrains senior level representation.
I want to talk a little bit more about leadership styles if I can, because the industry is facing a host of major forces right now, whether that's AI adoption, which we've already talked upon, climate risk, market volatility. So, Abbie, where do you see women's perspectives or leadership styles adding particular value when it comes to navigating these challenges?
I think there are a number of different powerful leadership styles that women tend to excel and bring to bear. I'd really talk probably about three different ones. One is just cross functional collaboration. The second is disciplined execution amongst a number of different priorities. And the third is just leading with empathy. Um, the first I mentioned, just cross functional collaboration. This is one of the defining capabilities of effective leadership in our industry. Insurance is inherently complex, and so the ability to work across silos and work together with actuarial, underwriting, technology, and the operations team around a shared goal is really important. And I think that will be important as we build organizations that are adaptive and resilient to environments that are shifting in the future. The second, just disciplined execution, I mentioned in fast moving environments, organizations that win are the ones that follow through with rigor and consistency. And women are often very skilled in working in environments with lots of different priorities, not just from a work perspective, but all the demands on their lives. And I really see women often excelling and delivering with focused execution. And then the last thing is leading with empathy, particularly in periods of significant change. And that can be whether it's a acquisition or technology transformation or market disruptions. Uncertainty is created in these environments, and leaders who take the time to communicate with transparency and bring their teams along will be really valued in the future.
And what are your thoughts on those characteristics that Abbie's raised, the Dionne, or indeed, do you have any characteristics that you would highlight?
Well, when we talk about technological advancement, the industry is growing with complexity. So women's leadership perspectives bring distinctive value to the insurance sector. So as AI becomes central to decision making and operational transformation, inclusive leadership plays a critical role in ensuring that technology is deployed responsibly and equitably. When women are actively encouraged to develop AI fluency and contribute to strategy, organizations are better positioned to mitigate bias. They're able to reflect diverse customer needs and harness innovation more effectively. So expanding access, again, there's that word access, sponsorship, and voice and digital initiatives strengthens both talent readiness and enterprise outcomes. Now, when it comes to the industry's exposure to climate risk, regulatory complexity, market volatility, these are demands. These are the threats that are faced that our industry is faced with. So when it comes to that it demands all of that demands, resilient and well-rounded decision making. Leadership styles often associated with women, to Abbie's point, is collaboration, holistic thinking, thoughtful risk assessment, which complement traditional analytical approaches and enhance strategic planning. So the reality is that teams that incorporate diverse perspectives are consistently more innovative and better equipped to navigate uncertainty, which I think is an advantage that is particularly relevant in today's risk environment.
I just want to pick up on a word that Dionne mentioned there, Milia, with you, if I can, and that's the word collaboration. Do you think that women are perhaps better suited to collaborative leadership?
Yeah, definitely. And indeed, I echo all comments made by both Dionne and Abbie in terms of collaboration, empathy, inclusive decision making, and the like. Whether it's nature or nurture, I think women can be more empathetic and collaborative and mindful of the broader teams and even the broader society around them. You know, we talk a little bit about climate change, but for me, insurance in particular, we talk about it as a financial product, but it's really a social product as well. And bearing in mind things like the impact that climate change will have on vulnerable customers and the broader community at large, and how that can be considered. You know, Dionne mentioned AI and increasing our capability and understanding in relation to AI, but also the impact that will have on our people. I'm sure you ladies have also already had people coming up to you saying, will my job be impacted by AI? What will happen to me? And just really providing that support, that empathy, and engaging and transparency with your people, I think will make businesses a success. From that market volatility point of view also, you know, I think when people see diverse, and it's not just women, it's diverse boards, it gives a level of comfort around ethical decision making, as well as the efficiencies, as you know, that the business has well-structured succession planning in place, and there's not a narrow view of what success looks like in the business, but a broader understanding of what is happening around them in society, and adopting an empathetic approach and a collaborative approach to decisions. So I think overall, yeah, I think there's some value there.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit more about how society is changing, because attitudes, without a doubt, have changed somewhat towards diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives recently. John, just tell me, how has that conversation played out in insurance, and indeed, what should companies be doing now to ensure that progress doesn't stall?
Well, across the insurance industry in Canada, the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion has evolved slowly, where there appears to be few organizations shifting from aspiration to accountability. So when we look at leading organizations, they're beginning to recognize that DEI is not simply a values-based initiative. It is a business imperative that directly influences things like talent retention, innovation, risk assessment, and ultimately client trust. Now, when you have diverse teams in place, they make better decisions and are also well equipped to serve an increasingly complex and global marketplace. When I was reading the EY Women in Insurance Study 2025, it specifically concentrated its efforts on the Canadian marketplace. The survey that was done was conducted in partnership with the Insurance Supper Club, which ISC global group. And for the Canadian marketplace, women occupy 66% of general roles within the sector, the insurance sector. However, their representation declined sharply. And we know this when we get to senior levels, with women holding only 25% of vice president positions and 18% of senior vice president roles. So when we get to the highest executive tier, they referenced publicly traded companies, whether or not that's insurance specific, but it's looking at Canada's 100 largest publicly traded companies, and 7 of them have female CEOs, right? So we're talking about sustained progress, and that requires more than performative statements. DEI has to be embedded into the organization structure with clear metrics for representation, advancement, and pay equity. And that needs to be tied to leadership performance. So when we look at that, we're looking or we're calling for action for formal sponsorship and development programs that open, again, those career pathways to senior roles, consistent, inclusive practices in hiring and promotion, transparent communication about progress and gaps, and recognizing that collaboration with internal stakeholders, such as your employee resource groups, and maybe some external associations with relevant expertise, will be essential.
Yeah, some fantastic points there. And Amelia, I guess at the crux of it all, is there a difference that we're seeing in the insurance sector between words and action?
Yeah, exactly. And picking up on some of the themes that Dionne mentioned as well, words for me are important, but actions, of course, speak louder than words. And why I say that is, you know, we do need to be mindful of the language that we use around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how it is supporting or hindering the progress of diverse promotions within a business. I was reading an article recently which talked about how women are often described in senior roles by their personality traits, and more people-orientated words like being too ambitious or not ambitious enough, whereas men are really discussed in terms of their tasks and their actual achievements. So just being mindful what we use, but ultimately, as I mentioned, our actions speak louder than words. So thinking about what we can do to support a more diverse, equitable and inclusive environment, looking at things like Dionne said, equitable pay, and actually looking at it and ensuring that there is equitable pay for people performing on an equitable basis. Looking at things like unconscious bias. Are we providing as organisations training on unconscious bias? Should we be looking at our recruitment processes, potentially de-identifying CVs so that you can't be influenced by whether a person is a male, a female, their race, or any assumptions or unconscious biases we might have based on a CV? Looking also at things like parental leave. I know, in Australia, the government provides some financial parental leave, but Crawford, where I work, provides actually more parental leave. But we also encourage men to have parental leave too, actual co-parenting, and supporting, again, more diverse cultures, and so that we still continue to push forward and not stalling in our drive for a diverse working environment. Flexible work arrangements I've spoken about before. They cut both ways for me, I'll be honest with you. I do think there's a lot of merit with people working in the office, that tacit learning rather than that more hardwired, data factual learning is certainly beneficial, but having some flexibility and supporting others who can't always come to an office for whatever there might be their reasons, I think really has added a lot of value to our businesses in the last few years. So I think there's a lot we can do to ensure that we don't stall in our fight for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace.
Some great tips there. And Abbie, just to pick that up with you, do you think enough is being done to perhaps advocate for high-performing women?
I think that's absolutely a place we can and should be focused, Paul. If I look across the geographies that we're representing here, certainly the data is very similar. Women are making in the U.S. Women make up, around 60% of entry level and or mid level roles in insurance, and yet less than 20% of more senior leadership positions. And so, to me, access to opportunity is where we can focus. And Dionne touched on this before. The companies making real progress are ensuring broad participation in cross functional projects or high visibility strategic initiatives. And senior leaders, whether men or women, can actively advocate for high performing and high potential women and thoughtfully assign different stretch assignments to build their experience base required for enterprise leadership. And this is a place we're really focused on bringing these principles into practice. And to me, being intentional about who is in the room when strategic decisions are being made and ensuring that women in our business have visibility to senior leadership and are given these meaningful development opportunities is really critical going forward.
Well, we're talking about getting women to the upper ranks of the insurance sector, but let's talk about getting them in the industry in the first place. Of course, talent attraction and retention are pressing issues across the sector. So, Milia, what barriers still exist for women entering or indeed advancing in the profession, and what practical changes do you think would make the biggest difference today?
I think we've already mentioned a few already, including cultural barriers. It's the fact that women still do tend to be the primary caregivers for children at home. And so, how we can support that potentially with continuing flexible and hybrid working relationships, as I mentioned earlier, can cut both ways. But I do think there's definitely a place for that. And I do know more and more businesses are sort of pushing for more time in the office. So, just making sure we find that balanced approach. Again, referencing unconscious bias being a barrier and what we can do around ensuring that we are, getting the right talent and then retaining them. Even considering things around networking events. When do they happen? Are they open to all? Are we only doing them at night times when people may have other commitments? I'm pleased to see that in this day and age, we do have networking events and opportunities to meet and advance careers at different times of the day and night, which I think is really beneficial for all people in their working career. But also, I think for a lot of women, the barrier is intrinsic within themselves and there's a lack of confidence. And I feel that often that lack of confidence is fueled by the fact that there is fewer women in more senior positions. Both the ladies have referenced some statistics around, 20 to 30% of boards or senior roles are still only women. So having that, we're referencing the Cinderella syndrome, where I sit back and I wait to be noticed, really women needing to put themselves forward, advocating for themselves, having that confidence to do so, but ensuring that the business is also structured in a way that it supports visibility of the competence and independence and supports women in their path of advancement in their career.
And there's something of a perception issue as well, isn't there, Abbie? Across the insurance sector, for men or women, it's just not seen as sexy enough.
Absolutely. I think the talent barrier does start with the perception of the industry. Um, for those of us that have been in the industry, we know that insurance is one of the most intellectually demanding and rapidly evolving industries in the global economy, and yet it's consistently undersold. There's different areas that we're focused on: managing climate risk at scale, deploying AI across underwriting and claims, just to name a few examples. And this should be compelling work. And we need to say so loudly and early to potential talent to join the industry, whether that's in universities or career development programs, and just how we talk about the industry publicly. Because we often see that when somebody joins this industry, they stay. So focusing on the perception, I think, and bringing in talent is a first step for us. When you ask about retention, uh, I think another challenge we face is we all know that a significant portion of the industry's senior talent is set to retire over the next decade. And this is not a distant problem for us. Decisions being made right now with how we fill our talent pipelines are really critical to make sure that we have the talent as these roles are vacated.
Imagining, Dionne, as well, that some of these issues are just further exacerbated for non-white leaders. Is that correct?
It is, and I give massive kudos to Abbie and Milia's responses, because within that conscious or unconscious bias, um, we're looking at the influence that it has on recruitment, promotion, and everyday decision making. And oftentimes it's reinforced by outdated perceptions of leadership style. So how a leader should act or communicate, that has changed. The risk appetite, So the leader's willingness to take risks, that has also changed, as well as the executive presence. So the image of what a leader looks like, we're shifting away from the traditional suit and tie in a lot of spaces. The confidence or the behavior that is expected of someone who holds a top role. So I think we need to really reframe the definition of what a leader looks like. Milia touched on the external pressures of caregiving. We've talked about access to influential sponsorship, because that to me still remains uneven. And to your point, Paul, it's looking at the underrepresentation of non-white leaders at senior levels. So that limits visible pathways for advancement and signals that the opportunities to young people or career changers coming into the industry that were not yet equitably distributed. And so when I go back to the EY report, it's called Breaking Barriers, Advancing Women in Insurance. The research that was done, within that research, there was a survey done by the American Society for Training and Development, and they revealed that 75% of executives credit career development to mentoring. But with most people aligning themselves with mentors who share similar backgrounds, have same gendered proteges, it goes on to address that while this outcome is not inherently harmful, the fact that 72% of senior vice presidents in the Canadian insurance industry are men, which means women have fewer opportunities to find mentors who can support their career advancement. So this factor contributes to their underrepresentation in executive roles and helps perpetuate the glass ceiling phenomenon when it comes to white women, and the concrete ceiling for Black women, right? It's very different between the two. So addressing these challenges requires deliberate action, embedding flexibility as a standard practice at all levels, shifting from mentorship to true intentional sponsorship will help, increasing the transparency around promotion and pay, strengthening early access to things like technical and leadership development, and ultimately holding leaders accountable through measurable diversity outcomes that are tied to performance. It's paramount at this point.
Yeah, and you've all been, very, very generous with your time. Thank you very much. It's been a fascinating discussion. I just want to throw one more question at each of you, if I can. Just tell me, what are some of the pivotal moments or trends that you think leaders perhaps are underestimating right now, especially when it comes to its impact on women in the industry? Abbie, anything that you would highlight?
Sure. And I think that Dionne and Milia and I have already touched some on this, but the pace of the shift towards technical fluency can't be underestimated. I think as AI analytics and automation reshape underwriting and operations, early exposure and experience in these areas is going to be critical for talent. And the way I think about it is you want to couple domain knowledge with AI fluency, and that combination will be really powerful for any talent in the future. So providing access and training will be important, and making sure that women are part of that. And then I'd say the other big pivotal trend is just faster decision cycles, which are partly due to the changing technology. Um, but that can potentially narrow who gets a seat at the table. And so, in volatile markets with compressed timelines, it may mean fewer voices are consulted. And so, again, being intentional about how we have high potential talent having exposure to these high stakes decisions will be really important going forward.
Yeah, some great examples there. And Dion, any trends that stand out for you?
Well, understanding that the industry is at a structural turning point, technologically, culturally, and competitively, um, we need to look at who is going to be the next generation of leaders. So hybrid working, we've touched on that, has increased flexibility, but without clear guardrails, it can create that visibility gap. So proximity bias, which is often unintentional, can affect access to stretch assignments, sponsorship, and promotions. Because women are more likely to use flexible arrangements, poorly designed hybrid models by organizations risk reinforcing rather than reducing inequity. So at the same time, AI, automation, and data-driven transformation are reshaping core functions in underwriting, claims, and distribution. So if women are not intentionally included in upskilling, digital leadership, and innovation pathways, they risk being concentrated in roles most vulnerable to disruption while remaining underrepresented, in positions shaping the industry's future. So the choices we make today around flexibility, digital investment, leadership criteria, and accountability will shape the strength of our future leadership pipeline. Leaders who consider these decisions through the use of a gender lens, for lack of a better term, will build stronger, more resilient organizations, while those who do not, they risk reinforcing outdated imbalances at a time when diverse perspectives are essential.
A great message for any leaders watching out there. And Milia, any final points from you?
Yeah, I certainly echo the comments made by Abbie in terms of AI fluency, and how we might be underestimating that in terms of supporting women in more senior roles, and we can do that. Most definitely support Dionne's comments in relation to flexible work arrangements and being visible, and what impact that will have not only for women but employees who are working in more regional areas. They can be your best employees, but sometimes maybe are being overlooked because they're not visible. And there is a push for organisations to have more and more people in the office. What does that mean? Are we considering all our consequences of that? But also for me, a trend that we really need to focus on is the slow pace of change. We've been talking about women being in senior roles quite literally for decades. And I think we need to ask ourselves, why aren't we there yet? What is it that is preventing us? Because we're about to have this next change now, like how Dionne described it in terms of we are at a change moment now with flexible work arrangements, AI. There's a lot going on in the industry that may push that movement back for diversity and inclusion. So why didn't we get there? And how can we continue to constantly challenge ourselves and progress and really create high-performing teams that support industries, societies, and our own families? How can we continue to strive and improve as businesses and as a society? I think there are things we need to challenge ourselves about.
Well, fantastic thoughts from everybody. And indeed, congratulations again to all of you on being named among this year's elite women class across the insurance industry. And remember, for more from the sector's elite from around the world, well, keep it right here on Insurance Business TV.